Good evening, traveler. Tonight, we leave behind the noise of the modern world and wander down a quiet, dusty road. A road that winds through the fields and forests of Westeros. A land of distant castles, fading honor, and the soft glow of firelight beneath endless skies. As you settle in, allow your breathing to slow. Let your thoughts grow quieter and drift gently into a simpler time. Tonight's tale follows a lone hedge knight, Sir Duncan the Tall. Young, uncertain, yet guided by a heart that values kindness over glory and honor over pride. With only borrowed armor, a weary horse, and memories of a fallen mentor, Dunk walks a path filled not with destiny, but with quiet choices. Choices that will shape kings, kingdoms, and legends yet to come. So dim the lights, close your eyes if you wish, and join me beside the campfire, where the night is calm and the story begins. If you enjoy peaceful journeys through myth, legend, and fantasy, consider subscribing so you never miss another tale whispered into the night. Now, let us begin. After Sir Arlen of Pennytree died, the road felt wider than it had any right to be. Dunk told himself it was only because there was no wagon behind him now. No slow old horse to mind, no cough in the night from a man who had slept too many winters under too many hedges. Yet the truth was simpler and harder. He had been a squire's for so long that he'd forgotten what it meant to be alone. Even the quiet had changed. When Sir Arlen was alive, silence had been a companion that sat by the fire with them. Without him, silence was a space that waited to be filled and would not be. They buried the old knight on a low rise where the grass grew thin and stubborn. There were no stones to mark the place, only a mound of earth and a few field flowers that Dunk gathered with awkward care. He spoke the words he had heard said over dead men before, though he did not know if he said them right. Sir Arlen had always been better with prayers than Dunk was. Sir Arlen had always been better with most things. When it was done, Dunk stood for a long while with his hands at his sides, staring at the fresh dirt. He had thought grief would come like a blow. Instead, it came like a weight in his chest, steady and heavy, pressing down whenever he tried to breathe too deeply. He had a sword, a shield, and a horse. He had a cloak that smelled faintly of smoke and rain. He had a helm with dents in it, and boots that pinched at the toes. He had a few coppers, not many, and a name that people would look at twice when they heard it. Sir Duncan the Tall. It sounded grander than he felt. He had been Dunk for most of his life. Dunk of Flea Bottom, if anyone asked. Dunk the boy who carried water. Dunk the boy who ran errands. Dunk who slept under stairs. Sir Arlen had made him more than that, had taught him to hold the lance straight, to sit a saddle like a man, to clean a mail's shirt until it shone. Sir Arlen had given him stories too, old tales of knights who kept their vows and took no coin for cruelty. On the last morning when Sir Arlen's breath had grown shallow, the old knight had taken Dunk's wrist with surprising strength. "You're a knight now," he had whispered. Dunk had wanted to ask how that could be true, when no Sempton had blessed him and no lord had tapped him on the shoulder with a sword. But Sir Arlen's eyes had been dim, and the words had mattered to him, so Dunk only nodded. "Yes, sir," he had said, because it was the one thing he knew how to give. Now, with Sir Arlen in the ground, Dunk said the words again to himself as he walked. "I'm a knight now." Sometimes it steadied him, sometimes it made him feel like a thief. The road carried him south and east through gentle hills and patches of woodland where the light came green through leaves. The summer air was warm, but the morning still held a coolness that made him pull his cloak tighter. He ate what he could afford, bread, a wedge of cheese when he was lucky, a bowl of thin stew at a roadside inn when his coppers allowed it. He slept where he found shelter, in a barn once, with mice rustling in the straw, beneath an oak another time, with his horse tethered close and his sword laid across his knees. On nights like that, he would remember Sir Arlen's voice, low and patient. "Don't sleep too deep," the old knight used to say. "A hedge may keep off the wind, but it won't keep off a thief." Sir Arlen had been right often enough that Dunk missed being corrected. Even the scoldings felt like warmth now. He tried to picture what he ought to do next as a knight, a real knight. Knights rode to war or to tournaments or to lordly halls where they could offer their swords for service. Knights were supposed to have a purpose. Dunk had only a direction, Ashford Meadow. He had heard of the tourney there while Sir Arlen was still alive. A great one, folk said, with fine prizes. Lords would come, and hedge knights too, all hoping to win coin or favor, or at least a meal and a story worth telling. Sir Arlen had talked of it with the quiet longing of a man who knew he might not see another tourney in his life. "If we had a bit more luck," Sir Arlen had murmured, staring into the fire, "we'd ride to Ashford. You'd see the best knights in the realm, Dunk. The best horses, the finest armor. It's a sight that stays with you." Luck had not come. Death had, instead. So Dunk rode to Ashford alone, carrying his mentor's wish like a small ember he did not want to let go out. He told himself he would find coin there. He would find service. Perhaps he would find a lord who needed a strong arm and did not mind that the arm came with patched mail and a plain shield. More than that, he hoped to find a place where he belonged. He did not say that hope aloud. It felt childish. Knights were not supposed to want belonging. They were supposed to want honor. But honor was hard to eat. One afternoon, after miles of sun and dust, he stopped by a stream to water his horse and wash the road from his face. The water was cold and clear. As he cupped it in his hands, he caught his reflection and frowned. He looked like a knight in a way, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair gone sandy from sun. Yet the armor sat a little long on him, as if it belonged to someone else. Sir Arlen's mail had never truly fit Dunk, and it never would. Dunk had grown too big, too fast. He touched the dented helm at his saddle, and remembered how Sir Arlen had taken pride in small things. "Keep your gear clean," the old knight would say. "A man looks like what he cares for." So Dunk cleaned what he could, though the road always returned its dust. When the evening came, he found a low hill and made a small fire. Not a high blaze that could be seen for miles, but a modest flame that warmed his hands and kept the dark from pressing too close. He ate bread and chewed slowly, listening to crickets and the soft sound of his horse cropping grass. It was peaceful enough that for a moment he could pretend the world had not changed. Then the loneliness crept back in, as it always did, and with it Sir Arlen's absence became sharp again. Dunk stared into the fire and spoke softly, as if the old knight might be sitting on the other side of the flames. "I'm going to Ashford," he said, "like you wanted." The fire crackled. The knight gave no answer. Still, the road lay ahead, and Dunk would follow it. He had been taught that much. When you don't know what else to do, you keep going. You put 1 mile behind you, then another, until the shape of the next day becomes clearer. Somewhere beyond the dark, Ashford Meadow waited, with its banners and bright armor and crowded tents. Dunk did not know yet what would be asked of him there. He only knew that he would arrive as he was, a hedge knight with a borrowed mail shirt, a thin purse, and a stubborn piece of honor he was not ready to trade away, and that, for the moment, would have to be enough. He lay down at last, with his cloak pulled to his chin. On the stars above him looked like pinpricks in a great indifferent cloak. He wondered what Sir Arlen would have said about his chances, and almost smiled. Then he listened to the horse's breathing, and let that steady sound carry him toward sleep, very slowly, mile by mile, dream by dream. The second morning after Sir Arlen's burial, Dunk woke before dawn, chilled by mist that had crept low across the ground. For a moment, he did not remember where he was. Then the smell of damp grass and horseflesh returned to him, and with it the knowledge that there was no one beside him to mutter about the weather. He rose stiffly and stamped life into his feet. The world felt larger in the gray light before sunrise, and emptier too. Yet as he saddled his horse and turned him southward, something faint stirred beneath the loneliness. A sense of direction stronger than mere wandering. Ashford lay that way. By mid-morning, he began to see signs that he was not the only one traveling with purpose. A pair of carts creaked past him along the road, piled high with barrels and sacks. Painted upon one side of the lead cart was a crude image of crossed lances. The driver tipped his cap to Dunk and said, "Off to the meadow, sir." Dunk hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. "Aye, then we'll see you there. Good custom for men who can keep a seat." The carts rattled on, leaving a faint cloud of dust and the smell of grain behind them. Dunk watched them go, his chest tightening in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. For the first time since Sir Arlen's death, he felt less like a lone figure on an endless road, and more like part of a current moving towards something shared. By noon, he overtook a small group of boys driving goats. They had tied scraps of colored cloth to sticks and were waving them as though they were banners. "One for House Fossaway," one of them shouted. "And one for the dragon," cried another. The boys fell silent when they noticed Dunk watching, but he only smiled faintly and rode on. The sight of their makeshift standards stayed with him. Even children felt the pull of Bashford. Toward evening, he passed a knight in bright new mail, riding the other way. The man's shield bore a device Dunk did not recognize, painted fresh and bold. The knight's horse stepped lightly, well-fed and well-shod. They nodded as they crossed paths. "Too late for the lists?" Dunk called, hoping his voice sounded steady. The knight gave a half-smile. "If you ride hard, you'll make it." The meadows filling fast. Then he was gone, leaving Dunk with the faint echo of polished confidence. "Ride hard." Dunk urged his horse onward. The road widened as it drew nearer to Ashford, worn by many wheels and hooves. Inns grew busier. At one crossroads, he found a cluster of tents already pitched, with men laughing around a cook fire. The smell of roasting wheat drifted to him, and for a moment his stomach twisted in envy. He did not join them. Not yet. There was still something in him that felt unready for company, as though grief had made him raw. Instead, he rode a little farther and made his own small camp beside a line of willow trees. That night, the air carried distant sounds. The faint ring of hammer on metal, the bray of a mule, a snatch of song borne thinly across the dark. Ashford was not yet in sight, but it was near enough that its presence hummed along the edges of the world. Dunk lay awake longer than usual. He remembered another night years ago, when he and Sir Arlen had camped within earshot of a smaller tourney. Dunk had been younger then, wide-eyed and eager. He had asked questions without end. "Well, there's the dragon, sir." "Only on Dennis," Sir Arlen had chuckled. "And knights who killed a dozen men?" "Perhaps. But remember, Dunk, most men who boast of killing are better at boasting than at killing." Dunk had fallen asleep dreaming of bright shields and under of hooves. Now he lay under the same sky, older by hardship rather than years, and the dream felt different. Ashford was no longer a spectacle to gape at. It was a chance, perhaps his only one for some time, to step into a world where a hedge knight might earn coin or reputation, or lose both. He turned onto his side and studied the stars through the willow branches. "Would I shame you?" he murmured softly, not sure whether he meant Sir Arlen or the Seven. There was no answer, but the question stayed with him. The next day, the road became crowded. Wagons bearing painted shields rolled past. A line of squires on thin horses hurried by, their lances bundled together like reeds. A minstrel rode with a harp strapped to his back, humming as though the tune itself were eager to arrive. Dunk kept his pace steady, though his horse began to tire. He did not have the coin to replace the animal if it failed him. He spoke to it gently, promising rest soon. At last, near midday, the land began to slope downward. From the crest of a gentle rise, he saw it. Ashford Meadow spread wide and green beside a winding river, and upon it stood a small city of cloth and color. Tents in red and gold, blue and white, green and black, rose in neat rows and haphazard clusters. Pennants fluttered. Smoke curled upward from 100 cook fires. Even at that distance, the movement of people was visible, bright flecks shifting against the grass. Dunk drew rein and stared. For a moment he felt very small. It was one thing to imagine a tourney while sitting by a lonely fire. It was another to see the scale of it laid out before him, filled with knights whose armor would not pinch and whose shields bore names known across the realm. He swallowed. "Well," he muttered, "you wanted a sight, sir?" His horse snorted softly, as if in agreement. The breeze carried faint sounds upward. Laughter, the clang of practiced steel, the murmur of many voices. The scent of trampled grass and roasting meat reached him too, mingled with river air. It was beautiful, not in the way of castles or sunsets, but in its ordered liveliness. A place where many roads had converged, and for a brief span, destinies would cross. Dunk felt the loneliness ease slightly in his chest. Here at least, he would not be the only man with little and hoping for more. Yet, as he urged his horse down toward the meadow, doubt walked beside hope. He was young. He was unproven. His armor was mismatched. His purse light, Sir Duncan the Tall. He repeated the name in his mind, testing it against the sight before him. He did not know yet what Ashford would make of him, whether it would lift him, ignore him, or break him. But the road had brought him here, and the road, for once, had an end in sight. He rode on, toward banners bright against the sky. By the time Dunk reached the outer edge of Ashford Meadow, the sun stood high and warm above the river. The nearer he rode, the more the ordered beauty of the place gave way to detail. Ropes staked into grass, boys hauling water, smiths hammering dents from battered helms, merchants shouting prices with cheerful insistence. He slowed his horse, uncertain where a hedge knight was meant to go first. Men in brighter armor rode confidently between rows of tents as if the ground itself welcomed them. Their shields bore sigils clean and certain. Lions, apples, dragons, flowers. Dunk's shield, by contrast, was plain oak, recently scrubbed, with no device yet painted upon it. Sir Arlen had meant to help him choose one someday. There had not been time. He dismounted near a line of tethered horses and stood for a moment with the reins in hand. The sounds of the meadow washed over him. Laughter, the clatter of dishes, the creak of leather. It was lively, yet not frantic. A gathering of men who had come for contest and coin, yes, but also for fellowship and story. Dunk swallowed and led his horse toward a large pavilion marked with crossed lances. The registration tent, if rumor had spoken true. A pair of stewards stood outside with parchment and ink. One of them glanced up as Dunk approached. "Name?" the steward asked, without looking impressed or unimpressed. "Sir Duncan the Tall," Dunk said, forcing the words to come cleanly. The steward's quill paused only briefly before scratching across the page. House. Dunk hesitated. He had no house. None, he answered at last. A hedge knight. The steward nodded, as though this were the most ordinary thing in the world. Arms, lance and sword. Fee is 2 silver stags. The words struck harder than they should have. Dunk had known there would be a fee. He had told himself he was prepared. Still, as he reached into his pouch and felt the thinness of it, something twisted in his stomach. 2 silver stags would leave him with little more than a handful of copper. Enough for food, perhaps, but not much else. If he lost in the first tilp, and there was every chance he might, he would walk away poorer than he had arrived. The steward held out his hand patiently. Dunk counted out the coins and placed them there. The sound they made as they changed possession was soft but decisive. "You'll be assigned a place along the eastern line," the steward said. "Lists begin in 3 days." 3 days. Dunk nodded and stepped aside, feeling lighter and heavier at once. Lighter because the step had been taken. Heavier because retreat was no longer simple. He was entered now, named among those who would ride. He led his horse away and found a modest stretch of ground along the eastern edge of the camp. It was not far from the river, where the grass grew thick and green. A few other hedge knights had claimed nearby spots, their tents patched but sturdy. Dunk had no tent of his own. He tethered his horse and set about arranging what little he possessed. A blanket, a saddle, his helm and shield. He propped the shield upright against a small stake and studied its bare face. It looked wrong among so many painted devices. He knelt and traced the wood grain with his thumb. "What are you, then?" he murmured. A knight's shield was more than protection, it was declaration. Without a sigil, he felt unfinished. Yet there was no coin to spare for paint, and no certainty in his mind of what image might suit him. A dragon would be foolish, a lion dishonest, an apple. He almost smiled at that, thinking of tales of House Fossaway. No, he would choose later, if he lasted that long. The afternoon passed in small labors. He cleaned his mail shirt as best he could, though the rings bore scars of many years. He checked the straps on his saddle, tested the balance of his lance. He ate a crust of bread and saved the rest. All around him, the meadow breathed with calm preparation. Knights practiced tilts in pairs, careful rather than reckless. Squires polished armor until it gleamed like still water. Minstrels tuned strings in the shade. It might have been peaceful, had it not been for the quiet knot in his chest. He was not afraid of pain. He had known bruises and broken bones before. What unsettled him was something smaller and more private, the fear of being found lacking. Sir Arlen had knighted him with dying breath. No Septon had witnessed it. No lord had heard it proclaimed. Would these men see through him? He rose and walked toward the river bank, leaving his modest camp behind. The water ran slow and brown gold beneath the sun. He knelt to wash his face again and caught sight of his reflection. "Sir Duncan the Tall," he said softly. The man in the water looked back uncertainly. He thought of Sir Arlen's lessons, given not in grand speeches but in small, practical corrections. Keep your word, Dunk. Protect the small when you can. Don't boast of what you haven't done. Those had been the measures of knighthood Sir Arlen believed in. Not bright armor, not famous blood. Dunk stood and dried his face with his sleeve. He would ride honestly. He would not cheat. He would not strike a fallen man. If that cost him coin, so be it. Honor was of thin comfort when the purse was empty. Yet it was the only comfort he possessed in abundance. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows between tents, Dunk felt the first stirrings of something like anticipation. The meadow glowed in amber light. Banners stirred gently. The river caught fire where it reflected the sky. He imagined himself riding into the lists, lance steady, shield lifted. He imagined the thunder of hooves and the impact, clean and bright. Perhaps he would unseat a lesser knight. Perhaps he would hold his ground. Perhaps. The word carried both hope and humility. Behind him lay a grave, unmarked by stone. Before him lay 3 days of waiting, and then whatever fate chose to give. He turned back toward his camp, shoulders squared. He was entered now, and that at least was real. Dunk woke the next morning to the sound of arguing nearby, the kind of argument that was more stubborn than loud. "No, you can't." "I can." "You can't." "I can." Dunk sat up in his blanket and blinked grit from his eyes. The camp was already stirring. A pot clinked. A horse snorted. Somewhere, a man laughed at something he had no right to find funny so early. The voices came closer, and then a small figure appeared at the edge of Dunk's little patch of ground. He was a boy, perhaps 10 or 11, thin as a rail and quick in his movements. His head was shaved close, as if he'd been scrubbed bare of hair, and his ears stuck out a little. His clothes were plain but clean. He stood with his hands on his hips, looking not at Dunk, but at Dunk's horse, as though he had already decided what it was worth. Behind him hovered an older man with a long face and a wary expression, holding a bucket. "I told him not to pester you, sir," the older man said quickly. "He's eager." The boy ignored him. "That's a decent horse," the boy announced. Dunk stared at him. "It's a horse," Dunk said. The boy sniffed. "It's a decent one. Not as good as Attorney Knight's Distria, but better than a plough nag. What's his name?" Dunk hesitated, then said the first thing that came to mind. "Storm." The boy looked faintly disappointed. "Storm? That's what you call a horse if you don't know what else to call him." Dunk felt himself bristle, then caught the edge of a smile despite it. "And what would you call him, boy?" The boy's eyes flicked over the animal with sharp assessment. "Something better, something that fits. He's got a steady eye. He's not stupid. I'd call him Egg." The older man cut in, as if the word were a warning. The boy turned his head slowly. "What?" The older man cleared his throat. "Don't tell a knight his horse needs a better name." Dunk leaned back on his hands, amused now. "Is that what you're doing? Advising me on horse naming?" The boy faced him fully at last. His eyes were dark and bright, one in confidence entirely too large for his body. "I'm advising you on many things," he said. Dunk laughed once, soft and surprised. It felt odd in his throat, as though he hadn't used laughter properly in some time. "And why would I take advice from a shaved-headed pup?" Dunk asked. "Because you're a hedge knight," the boy said at once, as if this settled everything. Dunk's smile faded slightly. Not gone, but tested. And how would you know that? He said. The boy lifted his chin. Because you don't have a pavilion. Because your shield is blank. Because your mail doesn't fit. And because you look like you're trying very hard to stand like you belong here. The older man made a choking sound, half apology and half horror. Egg. Dunk stared at the boy for a heartbeat, then exhaled slowly. You've got sharp eyes, he admitted unwillingly. I have eyes, the boy corrected. Most men just don't use theirs. Dunk stood and stretched, his joints popping. The boy watched him with open interest, as if measuring him from boots to brow. When Dunk straightened to his full height, the boy's mouth parted slightly. Gods, the boy breathed. Then he shut his mouth quickly, as if embarrassed at being impressed. You really are tall. That's what they call me, Dunk said. The boy nodded, as if accepting a fact about the world. Dunk. Dunk frowned. How do you know my name? It's written at the registration tent, the boy said. Sir Duncan the Tall. I can read. The older man shifted awkwardly, as though reading were somehow improper. Dunk rubbed the back of his neck. And what do you want exactly? The boy spread his hands, as if the answer should be obvious. I want to be your squire. Dunk blinked. My squire? The boy repeated patiently. You need one. I don't, Dunk said at once. You do, the boy said at the same time. Dunk's mouth tightened. I've managed fine without one. You managed, the boy said, but you looked like you slept under your own horse. Dunk glanced at his blanket and then at Storm. The boy wasn't wrong. I don't have coin to pay you, Dunk said, choosing what he thought would end the matter. The boy waved that away. I don't want coin. Dunk narrowed his eyes. Then what do you want? The boy hesitated for the first time. Not long, just enough to show there was something behind his stubbornness. A place, he said. The word landed quietly. Dunk looked at him again, not just at the shaved head and the sharp eyes, but at the thinness of his arms, the careful cleanliness of his clothes, the way he stood as if daring the world to turn him away. The older man finally spoke. He's been helping around the camp, sir. Runs errands, carries water. Is a good lad, if you can bear the tongue. The boy shot him a glare that could have scorched paint. Dunk folded his arms. What's your name, then? The boy paused, and Dunk caught the smallest flicker of calculation. Egg, the boy said. Dunk stared. Egg? It's a nickname, the boy said quickly. Too quickly. It's a foolish nickname, Dunk said, because it was, and because the boy needed to hear it. The boy's cheeks reddened. It's what people call me. Who calls you that? The boy lifted his chin again. People. Dunk could have pressed, but something told him not to. There was a stubborn wall behind the boy's answers, and pushing at it now would only make him dig in deeper. Dunk sighed. I don't need a squire. You do, Egg insisted, stepping closer. You've entered the lists. You'll need someone to hold your horse, clean your armor, fetch water, keep your gear from being stolen. You'll need someone to tell you when you're being stupid. Dunk snorted. I've got plenty of men doing that already. Egg looked around at Dunk's empty patch of ground. Do you? Dunk opened his mouth, then shut it again. There was a long pause. The boy waited, stubborn as a nail. Dunk tried to summon the sternness of a knight who could dismiss a child with a single glance. It did not come easily. He was too tired, and the boy's audacity was too absurd. Finally, Dunk said, if I took you on, you'd have to listen. Egg nodded quickly. I can listen. You'd have to obey, Dunk added. Egg nodded again, of course. Dunk eyed him. And you'd have to stop talking so much. Egg frowned. That's not part of it. Dunk laughed again despite himself. All right, he said, and heard the words leaving his mouth before he had fully decided to say them. You can come, on trial, for a day. Egg's face brightened so fast it was almost comical. He tried to look solemn and failed. A day, Dunk repeated, pointing a finger at him. If you steal, you're gone. If you lie, I won't, Egg said. If you get underfoot, I won't, Egg repeated with the absolute confidence of someone who very much would. Dunk shook his head. And if anyone asks, you're my squire. Egg drew himself up proudly. Yes, sir. The older man let out a breath that sounded like relief. Egg immediately stepped past Dunk and began inspecting the mail shirt draped over Dunk's saddle as if he had owned it all along. This needs oil, he declared. And your straps are cracked. And your shield needs arms. A knight can't ride with a blank shield. Dunk opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. The boy was in irritation, but he was not wrong. Egg looked up suddenly, eyes shining. I'll help you pick arms. Something good, something that says who you are. Dunk felt a faint tightening in his chest at that. Not pain, but something softer. The idea of a symbol, a name made visible, had been sitting like a stone inside him. He cleared his throat. We'll see. Egg nodded briskly, already moving, as if the matter were settled. And so, in the bright bustle of Ashford Meadow, a hedge knight who had been alone on the road found himself, almost by accident, with a shadow at his side. Small, sharp-tongued, and strangely determined. Dunk did not yet know what the boy truly was. He only knew that the road felt less empty, and that was a kind of comfort he had not expected to find. The first morning with a squire felt stranger than Dunk had expected. He woke to the soft scrape of metal on cloth and reached instinctively for his sword before remembering where he was. The meadow lay quiet in early light, mist drifting low along the river. A few distant figures moved between tents, but most of the camp still slept. Egg sat cross-legged beside the mail shirt, oiling the rings with careful, deliberate strokes. You missed a patch here, the boy said, without looking up. And here, it'll rust if you leave it. Dunk blinked at him. Morning to you too. Egg glanced up briefly. Morning, sir. There was something almost ceremonial in the way he said it, though no one else was near enough to hear. Dunk sat up and rubbed his face. You don't have to wake before me. Egg shrugged. I wanted to. Dunk studied him for a moment. The boy's movements were precise, not hurried. He handled the mail with respect, not clumsiness. The faint irritation Dunk had felt the previous day eased slightly. Did you sleep? Dunk asked. Enough, Egg said. You snore. I do not. You do. Dunk grunted and reached for a crust of bread from his satchel. Egg glanced at it and then at Dunk. That's all you've got? For now, Dunk said. Egg frowned slightly but said nothing more. Instead, he set aside the mail and began checking the leather straps of the saddle with quick, competent fingers. The camp was waking now. Smoke rose from cook fires in thin gray columns. Somewhere nearby, a squire cursed softly as a kettle tipped over. A horse stamped and shook its mane. Dunk stood and stretched, feeling the stiffness in his shoulders. Walk with me, he said to Egg. They made their way along the river's edge, where dew clung to the grass and the water ran slow and brown. Knights were already practicing with wooden lances in a cleared stretch beyond the tents. The sound of wood striking shield carried faintly across the meadow, rhythmic and measured. Egg watched them with keen interest. Do you think you'll win? He asked. Dunk considered the question seriously. I think, he said at last. I'll try not to fall off. Egg made a small sound that might have been approval. You're tall, the boy said. That's something. So I've been told. And you've got reach. Is that something too? It can be. Egg studied him with unexpected seriousness. You're entered, the boy said. That's something. It's 2 silver stags, Dunk replied, and a chance to be unhorsed before noon. Egg shrugged. Then get up again, Dunk laughed softly. They returned to camp as the meadow grew louder. Merchants were calling out their wares now, sweet cakes, ribbons, cheap wooden swords for boys who wished to feel brave. A group of squires hurried past carrying polished helms that flashed in the sunlight. Egg set to work without being told. He fetched water, arranged Dunk's gear in better order than Dunk ever had, and even bartered with a passing cook for a bowl of thin stew in exchange for hauling a sack of onions. Dunk watched him from the corner of his eye. "You didn't have to do that," he said when Egg handed him the bowl. "I know," Egg said simply. They ate in companionable quiet. Around them, the meadow felt almost peaceful. Knights laughed over shared jests. Minstrels practiced soft melodies beneath tent flaps. The lists stood ready in the distance, lances stacked neatly nearby. For a few hours, there was no cruelty in the world, only preparation and sunlight. Dunk found himself telling Egg small stories of the road, of a night when Sir Arlen mistaken a scarecrow for a bandit in the dark, of a tournament where a knight's horse had refused to charge because a goose wandered into the field. Egg listened intently, occasionally asking sharp questions. "And did he win?" "No." "Why not?" "He lost his seat." "Because of the goose?" "Because he was laughing." Egg grinned at that. The laughter felt good. Yet beneath the calm lay something else. A reminder that tournaments were not only games. Pride ran deep in noble blood. A misplaced word could carry weight. Dunk sensed it in the way certain knights rode, chin lifted too high, in the way squires flinched when masters frowned. He hoped quietly that Ashford would be kind. That evening, as lanterns began to glow and the air cooled, Dunk sat by the small fire with Egg opposite him. The boy was cleaning Dunk's helm with exaggerated care. "You're nervous," Egg observed without looking up. "I'm not." "You are." Dunk sighed. "I am." Egg nodded, satisfied. "That's good," he said. "It means you care." Dunk studied the fire. He did care, not for glory, not truly, but for the chance to prove that Sir Arlen's last words had not been misplaced. That Sir Duncan the Tall was not merely something spoken over a dying man's bed. The flames flickered, warm and steady. Across the meadow, music drifted faintly on the air. Dunk glanced at Egg, who was now examining the blank shield again with thoughtful eyes. "We'll need to paint something," the boy said. Dunk nodded slowly. "Yes," he agreed, "we will." He did not know yet what symbol would suit him. But for the first time since the grave on the hillside, he felt that perhaps he did not have to choose alone. The road had brought him to Ashford, and the meadow, bright and calm beneath the stars, had given him a small companion whose presence made the waiting easier. For now, that was enough. Egg stopped often to stare at shields and banners. There were apples and barrels, towers and stars, foxes and flowers. Some devices were painted with such skill that they looked almost alive. Others were rough work, done quickly by a man who cared more for the lists than for beauty. Dunk found himself studying them too, not because he understood all the houses, but because each one seemed to declare a story. When a banner snapped in the breeze, it sounded like a distant sail. "Look," Egg said at one point, pointing with his chin rather than his hand, as if pointing openly might be rude. "That one's a big one." Dunk followed his gaze and saw a pavilion larger than most, its cloth pale and its guy ropes anchored by carved stakes. A line of men-at-arms stood nearby in orderly silence, and a servant passed carrying a tray of cups as though the grass were marble. "A lord," Dunk said. Egg nodded. "A proper one." Dunk did not ask how the boy knew. Egg had a way of seeing rank in details, rope thickness, guard posture, the calm confidence of those who belonged. Dunk had seen lords too, but usually from the edge of things. Here, among so many, he felt both surrounded and distant, like a man watching a feast from the doorway. They came at last to the list field. It was longer than Dunk had imagined, roped off with poles, with stands being raised at one side for those who would watch. At the far end, squires were stacking lances, long and straight, their tips blunted for the sport, but still dangerous enough. Few knights were already practicing at a slow pace, letting their horses get used to the run, their arms to the weight and balance. The sound of hooves on packed earth made Dunk's stomach tighten. He tried to tell himself it was only hunger. Egg watched in silence, eyes bright. "Will it hurt?" Egg asked at last. Dunk glanced down at him. "A lance?" "Yes." Egg did not look away from the field. "How much?" Dunk considered the question as if it were a measurement. "Enough that you'll remember it," he said. "Not always enough that you won't stand again." Egg nodded, satisfied with that. They turned away and continued their slow circuit. Dunk let himself enjoy the camp's calm. There was laughter here, and boasting, but it was not the harsh laughter of men who take pleasure in cruelty. It was the laughter of men who had traveled far and were glad to be among others who understood the same language of horse and steel. At a cook fire near the river, a group of Hedge knights were sharing a pot of beans. One of them called to Dunk. "Oi, Tall, come eat with us if you've got teeth for it." Dunk hesitated, then sat with them. Egg settled at his side as if he had always belonged there. The beans were thick and smoky, and Dunk found himself grateful in a way that surprised him. The men spoke of small things, where to find cheap oats, which smith charged fair prices, which lord was generous with leftovers. Now and again they spoke of the lists, but even then their voices remained calm, as though a man could face danger better by speaking of it plainly. One of them asked Dunk whose man he was, and Dunk answered the only truth he had. "My own," he said. The man grunted. "Best way sometimes, worst way too." Dunk smiled faintly. "Aye." Egg listened more than he spoke. He was with questions rather than claims. "How many tilts do you get?" "Depends how far you last." "And if you fall, you get up if you can. And if you can't?" The Hedge knight shrugged. "Then you don't." There was no drama in it, only fact. After they ate, Dunk traded one of his spare straps for a small tin of paint from a peddler who had more wares than honesty. The paint was not fine, but it was something, and Egg's eyes widened as if Dunk had purchased a treasure. "We can paint you shield," Egg said at once. "We can," Dunk agreed, though he still did not know what. They returned to their patch of ground and sat with the blank shield between them. The meadow's noise softened as afternoon warmed into a gentle haze. A breeze moved the grass in waves. Somewhere a harp played a simple tune, repeating like water over stones. Egg dipped a finger into the paint and frowned at its thinness. "This is cheap," he said. "It's what I can afford," Dunk replied. Egg looked up at him, then back down, and said nothing more. Dunk rested his hands on his knees and tried to picture a device that felt honest. A tower, too grand. A stag, too noble. An apple, too borrowed. A sword, too plain, and besides, everyone had a sword. He thought of Sir Arlen's stories, of knights who began with nothing and made a name by keeping vows. He thought of the road, of hedges and rain and quiet fires. "A tree," Egg suggested suddenly. Dunk blinked. "A tree?" Egg nodded, earnest. "Sir Arlen was from Pennytree, and you're what he made you. It would fit." Dunk stared at the shield, and for a moment the grief of the last days stirred in him, not sharp, but present, like a bruise pressed gently. "A tree," he repeated. Egg dipped the brush and began to sketch, careful as he could. The lines were not perfect, but they were sincere. Dunk watched the shape appear. Trunk, branches, a suggestion of leaves. It was humble, and that humility felt right. When the paint was done, they set the shield in the sun to dry. Dunk stood and looked at it for a long time. "It's not much," he said. Egg tilted his head. "It's yours." That word settled in Dunk more warmly than he expected. As evening approached, lanterns flickered to life across the camp. The meadow became a constellation of small lights. Scattered on green earth, fires glowed. Voices grew softer. The air cooled, carrying the smell of cooking and river water. Dunk walked the edge of the camp alone for a little while, letting Egg stay by the fire with the horse. He found himself drawn to a quiet rise, where he could see the tents spread out below like a sea of cloth. Somewhere in that sea were knights with names known in songs, men who had squires since boyhood, and armor forged to fit. Dunk could not deny the small fear that came with the thought of facing them. Yet above that fear, there was a steadier feeling, too, a stubborn willingness to try. He thought of Sir Arlen again, not as a dead man in the ground, but as a voice in memory. "A knight is what he does," the old man had said once, when Dunk had asked what made a knight true. Dunk looked back toward his own small patch of ground and saw by the dim firelight Ed moving about with purposeful energy, setting things in order. The boy seemed almost pleased to have work. The shield with its painted tree leaned against a stake, newly claimed. For the first time since he had ridden away from a nameless grave, Dunk felt a quiet certainty. Tomorrow, he would ride into the lists. Whatever happened there, pain, defeat, or some small taste of victory, he would meet it as he could, not loudly, not proudly, just honestly, with the best of what Sir Arlen had left him. And Ashford Meadow, calm beneath the stars, held its breath with him. In the dark, the river murmured, and Dunk listened, letting dread and hope settle together. The morning of the first tilts dawned clear and bright, and the meadow stirred earlier than before. Dunk woke to the low hum of anticipation, not loud, not frantic, but present in the air like a change in weather. Armor was being fastened somewhere nearby. Leather creaked, a horse gave a sharp, eager whinny. Egg was already awake, sitting cross-legged beside the shield with the painted tree, inspecting the dried lines with critical attention. "It's crooked," he muttered. "It's a tree," Dunk said, pulling on his boots. "Trees are crooked." Egg tilted his head, considering that. "This one leans left. Then we'll ride slightly right." The boy huffed at that, but a corner of his mouth twitched. Dunk did not go to the lists at once. He took his time. He checked Storm's hooves, tightened the girth, ran a hand along the horse's neck. He tested the weight of his helm and adjusted the strap beneath his chin. Egg moved around him with small, efficient motions, fetching water, wiping dust from the shield's rim. From the far end of the meadow came the first sound of lances meeting, wood striking wood with a hollow crack that carried clearly across the grass. Dunk felt it in his chest. Egg paused too, listening. "Already?" the boy asked. "Aye." Another crack followed, then a low murmur that might have been approval from those gathered at the field. Dunk did not look toward it. He did not want to measure himself against the unseen riders yet. Instead, he led Storm at a steady pace toward the edge of the lists, stopping short of the rope. Spectators were gathering, merchants with folded arms, children perched on barrels, lesser lords standing in clusters. The great pavilions stood beyond, their banners bright in the sun. Dunk kept to the side. He did not need to see every tilt. He only needed to know that his name would be called when the time came. Egg watched everything. "There," the boy murmured once, nodding toward a knight who had just ridden past. "See how his squire holds the shield higher? It makes him look broader." Dunk glanced and nodded, though he suspected breath would not save him if a lance struck true. A roar rose suddenly from the field, not wild, but spirited. Dunk's heart jumped before he could stop it. Someone unhorsed. Egg guessed. "Likely," Dunk said. He adjusted his grip on Storm's reins and breathed slowly. When at last a steward approached and called his name, it felt almost unreal. The sound carried plainly across the grass. "Sir Duncan the Tall." Egg straightened as if the name were his own. Dunk handed him the reins without ceremony. "Stay clear," he said quietly. Egg nodded once. Dunk walked Storm toward the far end of the lists, the world narrowing in a way that surprised him. The crowd's murmur faded into something distant. He mounted, lowered his visor, and accepted a lance from a waiting squire who did not look twice at him. A signal was given. Hooves thundered. The impact came fast and clean, a shock through wood and bone, bright as lightning and gone just as quickly. Then earth and sky exchanged places. Dunk found himself on his back, breath driven from him, staring at a slice of blue sky framed by the rim of his helm. For a moment, he lay there, not from injury, but from surprise. Then he rolled onto one knee and rose, because that was what he had been taught to do. The crowd's reaction was neither cruel nor kind, simply attentive. His opponent circled once in acknowledgement and rode on. Dunk walked Storm from the field without drama. Egg met him at the rope, eyes wide, but not mocking. "Well?" the boy asked. "I'm still here," Dunk replied, removing his helm. A bruise would form later. For now there was only a dull ache and the taste of dust. "That's something," Egg said firmly. Dunk huffed a quiet laugh. They returned to their patch of ground as other names were called and other lances splintered. The meadow's calm resumed around them as if nothing of importance had occurred. A baker argued about coin. A minstrel tuned his strings. Two squires debated the merits of different saddles. Dunk sat and drank water, while Egg examined the slight clack along the rim of the shield. "It held," the boy said. "Aye. You'll ride again tomorrow, if they let me." Egg frowned at that. "Why wouldn't they?" Dunk shrugged. "Depends on how the lists go." The boy's mouth tightened in thought. As the day passed, Dunk moved quietly through the camp. He spoke little of his fall. No one pressed him. Hedge knights knew better than to dwell too long on a single tilt. What he noticed instead were the layers beneath the surface calm. Knights of high birth walked with a certain ease, as though the ground itself made room for them. Lesser men stepped aside instinctively. Servants bowed lower near the grand pavilions than near the patched tents. It was not cruelty. Not yet. But it was different. Egg noticed it too. "They don't see you," the boy said once, after a brightly armored knight had passed without a glance. Dunk considered that. "They see what they expect. And what's that? Not me." Egg seemed dissatisfied with the answer, but he did not argue. Late in the afternoon, a small commotion stirred near the center of the meadow. not loud, but sharp enough to draw attention. A raised voice, a brief silence following it. Dunk looked up instinctively, but from where he stood he could see only the tops of banners and the backs of gathered men. The moment passed quickly, swallowed by the general hum of the camp. "Nothing," someone nearby said dismissively. Dunk returned to his work, though a faint unease lingered. As evening approached, the meadow softened again. The sun sank low, gilding tent tops in amber light. Laughter returned more freely. Fires were lit. Dunk and Egg sat beside their own small flame, sharing a heel of bread and a bowl of thin stew acquired through Egg's persistent bargaining. "You fell well," Egg said after a time. Dunk raised a brow. "There's a way to fall well." "You didn't flail," the boy replied seriously. "You got up." Dunk stared into the fire. "That's most of it," he admitted. Across the camp, music began, soft and winding, the sort that does not demand attention, but rewards it. Knights spoke in low tones. Somewhere a man told a story, then made his companions chuckle quietly. For all its brightness and rank indifference, Ashford Meadow felt fragile in that moment, a place held together by custom and courtesy, by shared understanding of rules that kept pride from spilling over into harm. Dunk sensed it without fully naming it. The idea that chivalry was not only armor and lances, but restraint, choice, made again and again, not to turn strength into cruelty. He wondered how long such balance could hold. Egg yawned, trying to hide it. "Sleep," Dunk said gently. "You first," Egg replied stubbornly. Dunk shook his head, but lay back anyway, hands folded behind his head. Above him, the stars emerged one by one, faint at first, then steady. The meadow murmured softly. Tomorrow would bring more tilts, more names called, more chances to fall and rise again. For now, the camp rested in its ordered beauty, unaware of how thin that order might be. Dunk listened to the quiet breathing of his horse, the faint crackle of fire, and the small rustle of Egg settling beside it. In the hush between lances, he felt both the comfort of belonging and the delicate truth that belonging could be broken. And somewhere beyond the ring of lantern light, the first real crack in Ashford's calm had already begun to form, though Dunk did not yet see it. It happened in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. The sun stood mild above Ashford Meadow, and the lists had paused between tilts. Knights were watering horses. Squads of boys ran errands with more energy than grace. A few merchants had set up small boards near the river, where coins changed hands in quiet wagers. Dunk had just finished checking Storm's bridle when he heard laughter. Not the easy laughter of men sharing bread, but something sharper. It cut across the camp without raising its voice. He looked up. A small crowd had gathered not far from the central pavilions. The banners there were bright and proud, one bearing the three-headed dragon in red upon black. Beneath it stood a young man in fine armor, polished to a sheen that caught the light. His hair was pale and fell to his shoulders. His posture was relaxed, almost lazy. A prince, Dunk thought at once. Egg had gone still beside him. The laughter came again, from the prince. At his feet knelt a puppet showman, thin and anxious, his painted wooden dragon dangling limply from its strings. The puppet's red cloth wings brushed the grass. "Again," the prince said lightly. The puppet man swallowed and made the little dragon dance in the air, its mouth opening and closing. "I am the dragon," the puppet squeaked. The prince tilted his head. "No," he said softly, "you are not." A few of the prince's companions smiled uncertainly. The puppet man faltered. "My lord, it is only a play for children." The prince took the puppet from him with a gentle motion. For a heartbeat, it looked almost tender. Then he held it close to the ground and pressed its painted face into the dirt. "Dragons do not grovel," he said, almost thoughtfully. There was a ripple of uneasy amusement among the watching men. Dunk felt his jaw tighten. The puppet man reached forward instinctively. "My lord, please." The prince released the toy and regarded the man with mild curiosity. "You make mockery of dragons," he said. "Do you think that wise?" "It is only a tale, my lord," the puppet man said quickly, "for laughter." "Laughter," the prince repeated, as if tasting the word. He turned his gaze slightly, and for the first time, Dunk felt it pass over him. The look did not linger. It did not need to. Egg shifted closer to Dunk's side. The prince bent and lifted the puppet again, studying its red cloth and carved head. "A dragon is not a jester," he said calmly. "A dragon burns." He turned abruptly and held the puppet near the flame of a nearby cook fire. The cloth caught at once. The puppet man cried out, not loudly, but with the sound of something small and dear being undone. He scrambled forward, but one of the prince's companions placed a hand on his shoulder and held him back. The puppet's wings blackened and curled. Its painted eyes blistered. The prince watched with interest, as if observing an experiment. "See?" he said softly. "More fitting." The puppet man fell to his knees fully now, tears standing in his eyes. Dunk took a step forward before he knew he was moving. Egg's hand caught his sleeve. "Don't," the boy whispered urgently. Dunk paused, but only for a heartbeat. He remembered Sir Orlan's voice, quiet by a roadside fire. "Protect the small when you can." The prince released the charred puppet, letting it fall to the grass in a thin plume of smoke. "Take care what you make sport of," he told the kneeling man gently. "Some creatures are not meant to be mocked." The puppet man nodded frantically, clutching the ruined toy to his chest. The prince turned away as if the matter bored him now. Dunk stepped forward fully. "My lord," he said. The word felt heavy in his mouth. The prince stopped and looked at him. There was no anger in his expression, only mild curiosity. "Yes," he said. Dunk felt every eye in the small gathering shift toward him. The meadow seemed to quiet around the edges. "It was only a toy," Dunk said carefully. "For children." The prince regarded him as one might regard a new hound. "And?" he asked. Dunk swallowed. "It did no harm." A faint smile touched the prince's lips. "Did it not?" he said. "It made sport of my blood." The dragon banner stirred above them in a soft breeze. Dunk felt the weight of rank pressing in from all sides. The fine armor, the noble companions, the unspoken rule that some men were not to be questioned. "It seemed harmless," Dunk said. The prince's eyes sharpened slightly. "And you are?" he asked. "Sir Duncan the Tall," Dunk replied. "Of?" Dunk hesitated. "Of no house." A murmur moved faintly through the onlookers. The prince's smile returned, thin and amused. "A hedge knight," he said, as though identifying a curious insect. Dunk did not flinch. "Yes, my lord." "And you think to instruct me?" the prince asked lightly. "No, my lord," Dunk said, "only to speak." There was a pause. The prince studied him with open interest now. "You are very tall," he observed. "So I've been told." A few of the prince's companions laughed softly. The prince stepped closer, not threatening, not hurried. Close enough that Dunk could see the fine craftsmanship of his armor, the delicate inlay near the collar. "Tell me," the prince said quietly, "if a man insults your mother, do you let him?" Dunk blinked at the turn. "No," he said. "And if he insults your father?" "No." "And if he insults your blood?" the prince asked. Dunk felt the trap closing. "I would not burn his livelihood for it," he said. The words fell into the warm afternoon air like stones into water. Silence followed. Egg's grip on Dunk's sleeve tightened. The prince's expression did not change, but something behind it cooled. "You presume much," he said softly. Dunk held his ground. "I meant no insult." "And yet you gave one." The prince glanced down at the charred puppet, in the puppet man's trembling hands. "You value toys," he said. "I value fairness," Dunk replied before he could stop himself. The silence deepened. In the distance, a horse whinnied. The prince regarded Dunk for a long moment, and in that look was something that unsettled more than anger would have. There was calculation and something like delight. "Very well," the prince said at last. "If you value fairness, we shall have it." He turned slightly to his companions. "This knight believes himself a champion of small men and wooden dragons." There was soft laughter again. "Let us see," the prince continued calmly, "how well he champions himself." He looked back at Dunk. "I name you Craven," he said. The word was spoken gently, almost kindly. Dunk felt it land like a lance point. Around them, the meadow seemed to lean in. Egg inhaled sharply. Dunk's heart beat hard once. To accept such a word without answer would stain him. To answer it would mean stepping further into a conflict he had not sought. He thought of the lists, of coin already spent, of the fragile place he occupied among greater men. He thought of the puppet man kneeling still, and he thought of Sir Arlen's last whisper. "You're a knight now." Dunk straightened fully. "I am no craven," he said quietly. The prince's smile widened. "No?" he asked. "No." The prince inclined his head slightly, as though granting a courtesy. "Then prove it," he said, and just like that, the calm beauty of Ashford Meadow shifted. Not in fire, not in shouting, but in the quiet knowledge that honor had been challenged, and that the answer would not be gentle. The word "prove" did not echo, yet it seemed to remain in the air long after it was spoken. The prince stood as he had before, relaxed, composed, faintly amused. Only the circle of space around him had changed. Men who had been merely watching were now witnesses. Dunk felt the weight of that difference settle upon his shoulders. "I will not fight you for a puppet," he said carefully. The prince's brows lifted, not in anger, but in interest. "No?" he asked softly. "I spoke for fairness," Dunk replied, "not for quarrel." A murmur moved through the gathering. The puppet man had edged away, clutching the blackened toy, as if fearing he might be called back into the center of things. The prince studied Dunk for a moment longer, then turned his head slightly toward a knight standing at his side, a man older, broad in shoulder, wearing the dragon upon his shield. "Did you hear?" the prince asked lightly. "Sir Duncan the Tall will not fight." The knight did not smile. "Your Grace," he said carefully, "perhaps this is not." The prince raised a hand gently. "I did not say I would fight him," he said. He looked back to Dunk. "You struck my honor," he continued, his voice almost conversational. "You implied I acted unjustly." Dunk opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. There was no use pretending otherwise. "I did," he said. A faint ripple of surprise moved through the onlookers. Hedge knights did not often admit to striking at princely honor. The prince nodded slowly, as if satisfied. "Then you leave me little choice." He stepped back, just enough to make space, and his tone changed, not louder, but clearer. "I accuse you, Sir Duncan the Tall, of striking a prince of the blood in word and bearing false witness to his conduct." Dunk felt the ground steady beneath his boots, as though the world had narrowed to a single line he must walk. "I struck no prince," he said, "only spoke." The prince tilted his head. Words strike deeper than fists. Around them, several nobles had drawn closer, summoned not by shouting, but by the subtle gravity of rank and accusation. Their cloaks brushed the grass. Their faces were composed, watchful. Egg stood just behind Dunk now, very still. "What would you have of me?" Dunk asked. The prince smiled faintly. "Satisfaction," he said. The word was spoken, as one might speak of weather. A knight near the prince cleared his throat. "Your grace," he said again, more firmly now, "there are forms." "Yes," the prince agreed pleasantly, "there are." He fixed Dunk with a steady gaze. "You may withdraw your words," he said. "Name yourself mistaken. Acknowledge that you misjudged your betters." The meadow held its breath. Dunk could feel it. The invisible thread offered to him. Take it, and the matter would pass. The lists would continue. The bruise on his ribs would fade. His purse would remain thin but untroubled. He thought of the puppet's charred wings. He thought of Sir Arlen correcting him by firelight. He thought of Egg standing close enough that he could feel the boy's quiet, expectant presence. Dunk bowed his head slightly, not in submission but in thought. "My lord," he said at last, "I cannot say I was mistaken. The silence that followed was not loud. It was deep. The prince's expression did not shift into fury. If anything, it grew brighter." "Very well," he said. He turned to those gathered. "You hear him." The nobles exchanged glances, some cautious, some amused, some troubled. "Then let it be judged," the prince continued calmly, "by the laws of the realm. Trial by combat." The words settled into the meadow like a stone into still water. Trial by combat. Not a tilt for sport, not a friendly contest of arms. Judgment. Dunk felt the shape of it before he fully understood the weight. A trial meant champions. It meant that if he could not defend himself by strength of arm, the judgment would fall against him. Not merely in shame, but in law. "You would demand trial," one of the older lords said slowly. "Over this." The prince's gaze flicked toward him. "My honor is not a small thing," he replied. No one answered that. Dunk felt a tightening in his throat. Not fear, not yet, but recognition of scale. He had stepped across a line he had only half seen. "I accept," he said. The words surprised even him with their steadiness. Egg made the smallest sound behind him. Not protest, not quite. The prince inclined his head, satisfied. "Good," he said. "Then we shall settle it properly." He turned away as though the matter bored him now that it had found shape. "Send word," he told one of his companions. "Let my brother hear of it. Let all hear of it." The nobles began to disperse, murmuring quietly. Some glanced at Dunk with curiosity, others with something nearer to pity. The puppet man was gone. Within moments, the meadow resumed its outward calm. Lances would tilt again. Merchants would sell sweet cakes. Music would rise at dusk. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. Dunk stood where he was until the last of the prince's retinue had moved away. Egg stepped forward then, his face pale but controlled. "You could have taken it back," the boy said quietly. Dunk looked down at him. "Aye," he said. "Why didn't you?" Dunk searched for the simplest answer. Because it wouldn't have been true. Egg swallowed. "He's a prince," the boy said. "He has brothers. He has knights who would ride for him." "I know. And you." "I have you," Dunk said gently. Egg's mouth tightened. "That's not enough," the boy muttered. Dunk allowed himself a small smile. "It might be," he said. They walked back toward their modest patch of ground in silence. Around them, Ashford Meadow appeared unchanged. The river still glinted. The banners still stirred. Knights still laughed and boasted. Yet Dunk felt as though he were moving through a thinner version of the world. A trial by combat. He sat slowly and removed his helm, placing it beside him with care. The dent from the morning's tilt caught the light. Egg crouched opposite him. "What will you do?" the boy asked. "Prepare," Dunk said simply. "For death?" Egg pressed. Dunk shook his head. "For riding," he answered. He could not afford to think further than that. Not yet. The law had been invoked. The challenge accepted. Whatever came next would come swiftly. Across the meadow, word was already spreading. Dunk could see it in the way small clusters formed and dissolved, in the glances cast his way. The beauty of Ashford had not vanished. It had merely revealed its fragility. Honor, he realized, was not a shield that protected a man from danger. It was often the reason danger found him. He looked at the painted tree upon his shield and wondered whether Sir Arlen would have counseled caution, or stood beside him in the same stubborn silence. The sun moved lower. Lanterns would be lit again that evening, and somewhere among the bright pavilions, a prince of the blood would be smiling. The morning of the trial dawned without ceremony. Ashford Meadow looked much as it had the day before. The river moved in its slow brown course. The banners stirred in a patient wind. Men ate bread and drank watered wine. Somewhere, a minstrel tuned his strings as though the day promised only song. Yet beneath the ordinary sounds ran a quiet current of attention. Dunk rose before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. He had slept little, though he had lain still long enough to let his breathing settle into something steady. Egg was already awake, sitting beside the shield with the painted tree, hands folded around his knees. For once, the boy did not speak first. Dunk buckled on his mail in silence. The weight of it felt familiar now, almost comforting. He tightened the straps with care. Egg moved close to help. Fingers quick and precise. "Not too tight," Dunk murmured. "I know," Egg said. His voice was level, but there was strain beneath it. When the helm was secured and the sword belted, Dunk looked down at the boy. "If it goes ill," he began. "It won't," Egg said at once. Dunk held his gaze. "If it does," he continued gently, "you'll find another night, a better one." Egg's jaw tightened. "No." Dunk almost smiled. "Stubborn," he said. "Yes," Egg replied. The call came mid-morning. Not shouted, not trumpeted, but carried from mouth to mouth until it reached even the far edges of the camp. Trial by combat. Men gathered in a wide circle near the lists. Not for sport this time, but for judgment. Nobles stood nearer the front. Hedge knights lingered at the edges. The air felt cooler, though the sun had risen. Dunk walked forward alone. Across from him stood the prince's chosen champion, a knight of strong build, bearing the dragon upon his shield. His armor was unblemished, his posture assured. The prince himself stood slightly behind, watching with a calm that was almost pleasant. Dunk did not look at him. He stepped into the open ground and drew his sword. The steel caught the light in a clean line. His hand felt steady upon the hilt. There were words spoken, formalities of law and custom, but Dunk heard them as one hears distant bells. His attention narrowed to the man before him. The signal was given. They circled first. No shouting, no taunts, only the measured sound of boots upon grass. The champion struck first, clean, controlled. Dunk raised his shield and felt the impact travel through wood and arm. He answered with a strike of his own. Not wild, not reckless. The world became small. Steel met steel. The rhythm settled into something almost quiet, like a harsh dance. Dunk did not think of victory. He thought only of footing, of breath, of keeping his balance when the other knight pressed forward with greater weight. Once he stumbled, and a murmur moved through the watching ring. He caught himself and rose again, as he had risen from the lists 2 days before. The champion's sword glanced from Dunk's helm with a ringing sound. The blow did not fell him, but it blurred the world for a heartbeat. He blinked and stepped back, tasting iron at the corner of his mouth. Then he stepped forward again. He remembered Sir Arlen's voice, not in words, but in feeling. The old knight's steady presence at his side during practice bouts, the quiet correction of stance and grip. Keep your feet, keep your breath. The champion pressed him hard. Dunk yielded ground once, twice. Then he saw it, a small opening when the dragon shield lifted too high. He moved without flourish, without shout. Steel rang once more. The champion faltered. It was not dramatic, not a great crashing fall, only a misstep, a shift of weight gone wrong. The knight dropped to one knee. Dunk stood over him, sword raised. The world held still. He could strike down. The law would permit it. The prince watched. Dunk lowered his blade. "I yield you," he said quietly. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the champion bowed his head. "I am beaten," he said. The murmur that followed was different from before. Not loud, but fuller. Dunk stepped back. The formal words were spoken. The judgment declared, the accusation dismissed. The prince's face remained composed. He inclined his head slightly toward Dunk, not in friendship, not in apology, but in acknowledgement of outcome. The circle dissolved slowly. Men drifted back toward tents and cook fires. The river continued its patient course. Egg reached Dunk first. "You stood," the boy said, breathless. "Aye," Dunk replied. He felt the ache in his limbs now, the bruise forming along his ribs, the heaviness in his arm. Yet beneath the pain lay something quieter and steadier. Relief, not triumph. He had not sought to defeat a prince's pride. He had sought only to hold his own. The meadow resumed its life. Knights spoke in low voices. Some nodded to Dunk as he passed. Others merely observed him with new eyes. Honor, he realized, did not roar when proven. It settled. By evening, the camp's calm had returned almost fully. Lanterns glowed as they had before. Music drifted once more between tents. The puppet man had found another toy, smaller and simpler, and children gathered around him again. Dunk sat by this small fire with Egg beside him. The painted tree upon the shield caught the firelight in soft glints. "You could have struck him," Egg said after a time. "I could have. Why didn't you?" Dunk considered the flames. "Because I didn't need to," he said. Egg nodded slowly. After a while, the boy asked, "Was it worth it?" Dunk looked out across Ashford Meadow, at the tents, the banners, the quiet figures moving through lamplit grass. He thought of the grave on the hillside, of Sir Arlen's last whisper, of the road that had seemed so empty only days ago. "Aye," he said at last. It was. The meadow would pack itself away soon enough. The banners would be lowered, the lances stacked and carried home. Ashford would become only a memory, a bright gathering upon green grass. Dunk would ride on again. The road would stretch wide and uncertain, yet he would not ride it alone. Egg shifted closer to the fire, resting his chin on his knees. "You're really a knight," the boy said softly. Dunk looked at him. "I'm trying," he replied. The stars emerged above them, patient and distant. Ashford Meadow breathed quietly in the dark, as if nothing of consequence had occurred there at all. But for one Hedge knight, something had settled into place. Not fame, not greatness, only the simple knowledge that when the moment came, he had chosen as he wished to be remembered. The fire burned low, and somewhere beyond the edge of lantern light, the road waited once more. If this quiet tale of honor and the lonely road carried you through the night, consider subscribing and leaving a like, and we'll walk another path through the Seven Kingdoms together.